Welcome to the Narcissist Slayers podcast with your hosts, Hope Jay
and Lynn Catalano.
Every episode, we focus on recovery from narcissistic abuse. We talk about topics that we believe will help people to identify signs of abuse, learn strategies to cope, and most importantly, how to heal and move forward from narcissistic abuse. We are both survivors of narcissistic abuse ourselves, lawyers, and one of us is an author.
Well, thank you, Hope. My book, Wrecking Ball Relationships, How to Identify, Live With, or Leave the Narcissist in Your Life, is available in many places, including my website, lynncatalano.com.
Because we have been in your shoes, we know how difficult this journey can be. That is why I founded the Center for Hope of Western New York, a nonprofit organization which provides education, support, and advocacy for survivors of narcissistic abuse. You can find out more about the Center for Hope at centerforhopewny.org, and all donations are gratefully welcomed and tax exempt.
Please follow us on Instagram at NarcSlayersPod, and also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube, the Narcissist Slayers Podcast. You can also email us directly with your questions at narcslayers@centerforhopewny.org.
Welcome back to the Narcissist Slayers podcast. I'm your co-host, Hope Jay.
And I'm your co-host, Lynn Catalano.
And today we are going to be discussing part 2 of our How Do You Survive Toxic Workplace Where You Are Dealing with a Toxic Boss. We had our last podcast, I believe, was in November. We had our December podcast, which focused on the holidays and dealing with narcissistic people during the holidays. So we are back at our podcast here for the new year to follow up with our November podcast, and this is part 2. So I know that, Lynn, you've spent some time thinking about the ways in which we can provide people with some information and solutions, right? So last time we really focused on how do you know, what are you looking for in to really figure out if you are in a workplace where you are dealing with a toxic boss. And today we're going to look at, okay, now that you have figured that out and, you're kind of despondent and not really knowing what to do or where to turn or, if this can be fixed. So I am going to turn it over to you because this is really your area of expertise. I've said it before. And I know you've got a lot of information that you want to share with our listeners today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hope. Before I go into some coping strategies and some methods, I really want people to understand that if they are in a toxic workplace, if their immediate supervisor, if their boss, if their coworker is toxic to them, it affects your health. It affects who you are. You take it home with you and your loved ones feel it. Trust me, they know. They know. We talked a lot about the Sunday night dread, right? That feeling of, oh my God, I have to go to work and see those people tomorrow. So if you have these things, if you are in this situation, you really need to evaluate and really check yourself. Because if this is your situation, it's time to send out resumes. It's time to get on all these different platforms, LinkedIn and Glassdoor and all these places, and really do your own due diligence about the next workplace. Make sure that you look at previous employees or even talk to them, see if someone on LinkedIn, you can do searches so easily to come up with people who have those places on their resume and say, what was it like for you? Why did you leave? Because that's equally as important as getting out we talk a lot about relationships and how, wait, what did you call it? You just said something to me earlier before we started the podcast about relationships, how you do the same thing over and over again.
Oh, relationship repetition syndrome. Yeah.
But guess what? It's the same thing in the workplace. You're going to end up in the same place if you don't ask questions and figure out what was wrong with that first place. I mean, trust me, our last episode in November, we listed 10 red flags of workplaces and bosses that you can't thrive in those atmospheres. So,
right. So can I just ask a question just so that our listeners are kind of able to orient themselves. So I think what I hear you saying is that there is no real redemption if you are in a toxic workplace. I mean, some of the things that I had wanted to ask you is, are there, remedies that you can search for within the workplace to try to create safe space, or perhaps find allies that might be able to help you, or go to HR. Like there's a lot of things that I had thought about, and it coming up in the world. Anybody who has been in the working world for any period of time has found themselves in a workplace that is not a healthy workplace. We've all been there. I think that one of the first things that, I thought to do was to find an ally, to find a mentor, to find somebody that could perhaps help me or shield me, or, someone that would nurture me in a way that I wasn't able to get from my direct supervisor. And because I loved my job, Lynn,
Oh,
and I didn't want to leave my job. It was more or less like the dream job, like the job that I really wanted when I graduated from law school.
wow.
So I wasn't ready to put out my resume. Now, eventually I did. Right. I'm not going to say there was a totally happy ending here.
Because
But
it's
one of
not
the things,
sustainable.
yeah,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I was able to do, and some other people were able to do in this environment, was to find more or less like a mentor or somebody that would kind of shield you from the toxicity. So we had a very toxic uh, boss, a person who was at the head, like the department head, right?
Okay.
But there were people underneath him who saw, and they were a buffer. They were able to kind of do some of that buffering. Do you think that that's an option for people, Lynn?
Well, so I think it's a really interesting question. And I think that obviously it depends on the situation and the organization. So here's things that I've learned. I was in two different toxic work environments. The first one was a really tiny organization that had like 10 employees. And so in that situation, we didn't have a dedicated HR person. In fact, for until there was trouble, which I lasted through, and I can describe the trouble in great detail, but I think I've done a little bit on previous episodes. Um, and the trouble was that the director had to be fired. Okay. The trouble was the director had some inappropriate financial issues within the organization. So that being said, there was no HR. There wasn't even outside HR at that point. After he had to be fired, they then enlisted the help of an outside HR company, which, there are places that specialize in that for smaller organizations. That makes it really difficult to go to HR about someone, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, there wasn't any HR, and they were kind of, which a lot of organizations do. If they have 10 employees or less, they probably don't have an HR person,
Right.
or they have an outside HR person, which again, not so easy to go to. Okay, so that answers one of your questions. Now, on the flip side of that, the second toxic workplace I worked in, where I look back now and I think, oh, they were like that relationship that you get into and you go, oh, they have great potential. I think I can help them change and make this work. Well, that was really not very insightful at all. Now that I see that, it's easier to see that hindsight is 2020.
Right.
But they did have a dedicated HR because they were over 1,000 employees.
Right.
They had a dedicated HR, but the HR was compromised. The
Yes.
HR had as many directors. They had like 11 directors in the last 10 years. So like no one there was staying very long, either by choice or the CEO, who
Right.
was the toxic boss, was saying, bye-bye. You don't.
Well, it definitely, yeah, it definitely permeates like when we talk about a toxic workplace, I think what we're really talking about is the culture
Yeah,
of the workplace. It's the
yeah.
culture. So if HR also is, a part of that culture, and they're dismissive of, or somehow they're permitting this type of behavior to continue by either not addressing it, not confronting it, ignoring it, or deciding that you're the problem, I think that's, one of the things that you had brought up before, then yeah, you're not going to get any traction there.
No.
I didn't think HR was particularly helpful either, and for the reasons that you're saying. I don't think that we're telling people not to report bad behavior to HR, and not to speak out about bad behavior. Like, interestingly, we see people speaking out about things all the time. Like, this is maybe neither here nor there, but I feel like it is relevant in today's culture, or what's happening in today. But the whole thing that happened with Blake Lively, and her co-star in that film, It Ends With Us, which happens to be about domestic violence. She came out and said that she had been treated poorly on the set, that there had been sexual harassment going on between herself and the co-star, Justin. I can't think of his last name right now. Sorry, but anybody who saw It Ends With Us will know what I'm talking about. It's been in the news. It's been on social media. And she stood up and spoke out about the toxic culture that was going on the set, and that she was, she wanted to do this to help other people, other women who might be experiencing, sexual harassment in that context, because she felt it was really important to show that, the strength in being able to speak out. And of course, she's getting all kinds of backlash for it, from every direction. So it's not easy to do, even when you're Blake Lively. Okay, even when you are a star who has credentials and who is a person who has a a whole lot of reach.
I'm going to stop you because I want to focus on this stuff. And I think that case is very complicated and it is being played out in the media. And I think that it is very much a he said, she said, not different in a lot of ways from the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp issues. And so I think it's a very fine line because they both keep coming out with receipts and texts and evidence. And it's very difficult to know what actually happened. I don't know.
I'm not making any sort of a judgment in terms of what happened, but what I'm saying is I'm just using it as an example of, even when you do decide or you're going to speak out, that doesn't necessarily mean
it's not going to be easy. Yeah.
Right.
And nobody loves you for saying, hey, for shedding a light on the bad behavior, because I know for me in the first situation that had less than 10 employees, these people were happy to have a job. They didn't care what was going on. The people that did care left. And it was an awful situation, and it is still an awful situation today because they did things that were very backwards. They ended up hiring the treasurer of the board who had okayed so many of these inappropriate financial issues from the previous director as the new director. So I have a lot of issues with that particular organization. And guess what? My voice ended up, I'm going to tell you, I'm here to say that there was not value to me standing up and saying.
So I mean, I feel like that we are, pointing out all of the potential landmines that you might end up stepping on if you do try to hold one of these, people accountable.
Yeah, I think
so what is it that you would tell someone if they, I think we kind of want to talk about two different paths. Somebody who wants to stay, okay,
right.
And somebody who wants to go, right? So there's two sort of paths that somebody can go on in this situation. If somebody wants to stay, I had said, yeah, find somebody other than that person who you can develop a relationship with, who might be able to nurture you, mentor you. If it is, something that you are invested in and want to stay in that career, and you don't have options at the moment to leave, because let's face it, not everybody can just leave their job.
I agree.
So I'm trying to, what's that?
There's issues there. There could be good childcare. There could be good insurance. There could be the benefits outweigh leaving. And so you have to figure out how to deal with it. That's what I'm going to give you today.
Okay.
But I will tell you my caveat is always leave. Leave,
Okay.
leave, 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 leave. It is not sustainable. And guess what? At the end of the day, your family, yourself, your health are all worth so much more than
I
whatever that
agree. I
job is.
agree with you, Lynn.
Yep,
I do. I mean, in a perfect world, everyone would have the ability to leave this
yep,
environment.
yep.
But let's talk about what advice that you would give to somebody who's trying to navigate this situation and that they're not able to leave at this time.
Okay, so basically, I have three things that you can do
Okay.
if you're going to stay and if you need to stay for whatever reason. So, number one, the big thing is really to change your perspective. And I know how important this is because I had that Sunday dread and I would go into work every Monday and I would think, oh my God, I can't believe I have to work for this person. I can't believe that like this is how they're doing things and it's okay. And like nobody else is saying anything. Like, how is this okay? So I think that if you change your perspective, like, okay, I'm getting paid to do this. This job allows me to, save for my child and pay the mortgage and do all these things. You have to change how you're thinking about it. Gandhi said, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would change. So we know this, okay? So we have to use our high levels of emotional intelligence to be that change that we want to see in the organization. So become empowered that the knowledge that your toxic boss's bad behavior is rooted in deep insecurity and change your perspective. So try not to take their words and actions personally. When a boss micromanages you, just focus on the task. Just do whatever it is, right? If you're going to stay, then do the job and do the job well, no matter what. And this one is a big one. And I actually advise my clients to do this in personal relationships too. Try and avoid as many interactions as you can with
Mm,
this person because it like don't sound an alarm. Like don't be absent from a staff meeting that occurs that where you're supposed to be. But if you can, talk to them on the phone instead of having a meeting with each other, do it on an email. It's so much better for your mental health. It allows you to focus on the job and you'll find them more tolerable, if you're not seeing them all the time. So that's number one, change your perspective.
okay.
All right. Number two is really alter your approach. So what do I mean by that? Well, we know that narcissists, first of all, narcissists manifest in the workplace as toxic employees, right? They're
Right.
toxic bosses, they're toxic coworkers, whatever. Okay.
Right.
So they have very similar characteristics to traditional narcissists. And that's what we went over. So if anyone has questions about that, go back and look at our
Right.
November
Yep.
podcast, 10 red flags. Okay. So accept that this person doesn't communicate well or at all, like accept their communication style. Like stop challenging it,
Yep.
embrace it. The more you learn about their communication preference, the better you'll be able to adapt and have more effective, efficient conversations with them. When a boss texts you on evenings and weekends, try and establish boundaries, but know that you'll probably have to answer them at some point and just be professional, figure out your limit. I know we can't control other people. We know that,
Right.
right? But we can control how we respond to them. And so
Yeah.
like keep the relationship professional, like be respectful, but just try and do it on your terms.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were saying that in my head, because mostly translates to the interpersonal side of things, is really using the same techniques that I tell people to use with their narcissistic partner or ex-partner is the gray
Absolutely.
rock technique,
Yep.
that you want to keep emotion out of it. You certainly don't want them to know when they get you riled. I remember having an interaction with the toxic bots that I mentioned in the last episode. And, I really, and it was the only time ever in my entire professional career that I felt like I was going to cry.
Oh,
And I am not a crier like that. That just really not, to have to be pushed to that limit in a professional setting. That was a big deal for me. So I remember holding on to myself and telling myself, you're not going to cry. You're not going to cry. You're not going to give her the satisfaction of
Wow.
seeing you cry.
Wow.
Because as we know, they feed on those emotional reactions that makes them
Yep.
feel powerful.
Yeah.
So I think that's a perfect kind of example for people, like, keep as much as you can. Go in the bathroom and scream, which I think is what I did. I went in the bathroom and sat in a stall, but go in the bathroom, but don't ever let them see that they have, they're having that kind of effect on you, because it gives them power.
But I'd also tell you, don't keep it inside and take it home with you, because then
Mm,
it's your partner, it's your family, it's your
yep,
friends who get the brunt of that. So
right.
I would tell you, find an outlet. I happen to love kickboxing.
Mm,
I find so much relief.
put their face on.
Fantastic. It's a
Yeah,
great workout and
right.
get all your aggressions out. So
Yep.
I'm going to tell you, you have to figure out an outlet. So whether
Yes.
that is some form of exercise, meditation, prayer,
A
whatever works
healthy
for you.
outlet,
Yeah.
not drinking
No,
or
no, no.
using drugs for, to keep yourself medicated so you don't have to deal with those
Or
emotions. It's
ice
not
cream.
worth it.
No,
It's not
no.
worth it. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree completely. I really do. I agree with you on all levels. Um, my number three is kind of tongue in cheek, because I take it from a Rolling Stones song. You can't always get what you want, but you might just find you get what you need. So you need to be strong enough that when you don't receive the credit you deserve, or the recognition, or the positive praise for the exceptional work you're doing with this type of leader, you need to be okay with that. And it's not an easy thing, but you need to know that you're not going to get that kind of
Right.
good leadership from this type of boss. So you need to have inner resources. You need to know, I am worthy and I am enough and I am great at my job and all
Right.
those good things, because you need to have that confidence in yourself that it doesn't matter if your boss takes all the credit for what you did or doesn't give you one iota of praise.
That's difficult, I think, especially when you're a newer employee, or you're just starting out in your career, because you really are looking for that kind of feedback, even constructive criticism, not necessarily being praised all the time. And
Right.
you're not going to get
No,
anything like that from a toxic boss.
no, we
So,
talked about that last time.
and that's why I say, because it did work for me. I
Yeah.
found somebody else. I found somebody who was able to provide those things for me in a limited amount, because it wasn't my direct supervisor. But there are other people perhaps that you could find in an organization that can fill that role for you.
I'll tell you, in my small organization, everyone truly felt the same way. They all
Right.
questioned things, but they didn't want to speak out.
Right.
So that was a very odd situation. And then the bigger organization, I was a new employee, and here I am, all fresh and thinking I can change them, right? I can
Yeah.
make it
Yeah.
better. And people said to me that they have never worked in a place that was more everyone stabbing everyone in the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, are you kidding? And then someone else, like I'd go to a meeting with that group, and that's what they would say. And then I'd have another meeting, and the next group would say, "Oh, this is the 10th director in 3 years in this department." And I'd say, "Are you kidding?" Like they had
Yeah.
such high turnover. So like that was what the culture brought.
Right.
So in that situation, what did I realize? Little old me is not going to change this organization.
Right.
Little old me is not going to change the culture, not with the CEO and the board of directors and everything
Right.
else. And so as much as I did my job, I focused on my job, it was never enough. As you
Right.
know, in a narcissistic relationship,
Right.
it's
which
never
which
enough.
brings you to, ultimately, I think, for as long as you can find the coping mechanisms to deal with the situation. But just like in a interpersonal relationship, at some point, it's you may be sacrificing too much.
Yes.
And you're going to realize that when it's depleting you and taking a toll on your personal relationships and everything, like you're saying, your health, all the same things that happen when you're in an interpersonal relationship with a
Yeah.
narcissist will happen in an organization as well. So our final word of advice is
Leave.
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 And to plan to leave, which
Yeah.
means, while it's easier to get hired when you already have a job. That's an old adage, right? So
I actually have this great phrase that I put in when I do talks to organizations. Here's to bad bosses. May we never know them. May we never be them. May we learn to steer clear of them. So,
and on that note, I just wanted to say that we wanted to give a shout out to our listeners and our followers on YouTube, because we have reached over 200 subscribers on YouTube. That is so exciting. If you are listening to us, give us a follow on YouTube. We would
please.
love for you to follow us and follow our content. It's nice to listen to podcasts, but it's also kind of cool to watch and to see us on video as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on the next episode of the Narcissist Slayers.